One of the biggest challenges with making a sequel to Expedition 33 is that the ending leaves the story in two completely different places. Both choices have massive consequences, and because of that, you can't really assume that one ending is the correct one to build the next game around. Any sequel would have to respect both endings. So I started thinking about what direction the story could actually take from here. And there are three possibilities that I would love to see explored within the sequel. It could explore the events that led to the fire. It could dive deeper into the war between the writers and the painters. Or it could follow Maelle creating a new canvas of her own. The first direction I would absolutely love to see is a prequel that shows the events leading up to the fire that changed everything. In the original game, the fire is one of the most important moments in the entire story, but we never actually experience it ourselves. We only see the aftermath and hear different characters talk about what happened. And because of that, there's still a lot of mystery around what actually took place and why things escalated the way that they did. A prequel could finally show us what life was like for the Desandre family before everything fell apart. We could follow Alicia as she becomes Maelle and see what her personality was like before the tragedy happened. From the way the story describes it, she was incredibly young at the time, and probably didn't fully understand the conflict happening around her. This is even hinted at by Clea, who blames the fire on Maelle being naive. So a prequel could explore what actually happened between Maelle and the writers, and how they might have taken advantage of her in order to start the fire in the first place. Another reason this idea of a prequel would be very interesting is because it would finally let us see the original Verso before he died. Most of what we know about Verso comes from the painted version of him that exists inside the canvas. But the real Verso, the one who existed before the tragedy, might have been very different. Seeing his real personality and relationships with the other characters and the way he viewed the world could add a lot of depth to the story. I know I would personally love to see the differences between the real Verso and the painted version of him. Even though the painted copy has Verso's memories, he still acts as his own person in many ways. So seeing how the original Verso behaved compared to the painted version could be really interesting to explore. A prequel could also show us why Verso chose to sacrifice himself for his sister, and how that moment actually played out. Right now we really only understand the outcome of that decision, but seeing the circumstances that led up to it could make that sacrifice feel even more powerful. It would also give us a chance to see what Verso's relationship was like with the rest of the family before everything fell apart. Since the entire family eventually breaks apart because of his death, it would be really interesting to see the impact he had on each of them while he was still alive. Understanding those relationships would better also help explain the different ways each character deals with grief during the events of Expedition 33. And a prequel could even show the moment where Verso decides to create the canvas in the first place with Clea. Seeing the real Verso make that decision and watching the creation of the canvas unfold could easily become a memorable moment in the story. We could see a flashback to when Verso and Clea were playing together in the canvas, and we could see characters like Francois and SK playing with the little boy Verso as it was referenced in the original game. Another direction that I would think would be incredible for a sequel is finally diving deeper into the war between the writers and the painters. This conflict feels like an important part of the world's lore, yet we barely get to see it in action during the game. We know that it exists, and we know it's serious enough to cause devastating events like the fire, but we never actually see how this war actually works. And a sequel could finally show us the larger scale of this conflict. For example, we could learn more about why these two factions dislike each other so much in the first place. Do they dislike each other because one side wronged the other, or do they fundamentally disagree about how worlds should be created and controlled? Painters seem to shape the worlds through emotion and imagination, and writers might approach creation in a completely different way, focusing more on structure and control over how stories unfold. Those two philosophies could easily clash in some very interesting ways. Another idea that could possibly make the storyline compelling is the possibility of playing as a writer at some point during the story. Seeing the conflict from the writer's perspective could completely change how we understand the events of the first game. From their point of view, the Desandre family and the painters might actually be the ones causing harm. And if the painters have the ability to create entire worlds and populate them with sentient beings, then the writers might see that as a dangerous or irresponsible decision. That kind of perspective shift could make the conflict feel a lot more morally complex, instead of just presenting one side as the clear heroes and one side as the clear villains. This storyline could also explore what Clea was doing during the events of the first game. We know that she spent a lot of time dealing with the writers and trying to stop them, but we never actually get to see that part of the story. A sequel could show the missions she was involved in and the battles that she fought. Everything else was happening around her during this time, and we could see the role she played in trying to hold the situation together. It could also explore how painters actually use their abilities in combat situations. We've seen how they fight within the canvas, but a full-scale conflict between writers and painters could push those abilities even further and see if any of those powers translate into reality. Maybe painters create massive constructs, entire environments, or maybe even living beings to fight alongside them. And at the same time, we could finally see what kind of powers the writers have and how they counter the abilities of the painters. And that alone could lead to some incredibly creative gameplay and storytelling. And the third direction I think would be very interesting is the possibility of Maelle eventually creating a canvas of her own. Throughout the first game, the canvas we explore is shaped by Versal's memories and imagination. It reflects the people and ideas that mattered to him. But if Maelle were to create her own canvas, it would probably look very different. Her world would likely be influenced by the journey she went through during the events of the game and the people she met along the way. Maybe she would recreate some of the characters that meant the most to her, like Eske, Gustav, or Minoko. But instead of simply recreating the exact same world, her canvas could reflect how she's grown as a person. There's also an interesting question about why she would want to create a new canvas in the first place. Maybe it would start as a way to escape the real world and the pain that still exists there, but over time that canvas could also become something more important. It could potentially play a bigger role in the conflict between writers and painters. Maybe her world becomes a new space where different ideas about creation and freedom are explored. Or maybe it becomes a place where new characters and stories happen that are completely separate from the original canvas seen in Expedition 33. Either way, seeing the kind of world Maelle would create and how it reflects her growth would be an incredibly interesting storyline. So overall, one of the things that makes Expedition 33 so memorable is how much of the world it feels bigger than the story we actually experience. The game leaves a lot of questions unanswered, but in a way that makes the universe feel full of possibilities. Whether it's exploring the events that led to the fire, diving deeper into the war between writers and painters, or seeing what kind of world Maelle might create in the future, there are so many different directions the sequel could take. And honestly, I'd love to see the developers explore any of them. But now I'm curious what other people think. If Expedition 33 ever got a sequel, what direction would you want to take the story?